Hey everyone, today we're ranking the character portraits worst to best. Recently, or fairly recently, we got new portraits for the characters, and they've proven to be fairly divisive from what I've seen within the community. Sadako's portrait is really strange. She's kind of awkwardly standing in the corner. Admittedly, her portrait is tough because it's mostly hair. I think exposing the eye would be too much, and kind of ruins the mystery and danger that is present with the eye. If it's always on the portrait, it ruins it when it does appear, if that makes sense. Trapper's one I'm not too keen on. I don't really get what it's going for with him looking off to the side. It just looks like he's in the wrong position. If it's to show sort of a defiance and dislike of his position, I think maybe it could use some adjusting. Huntress's pose is fine. I'm not too sure why she's looking down like that. I don't feel like it makes much sense with her being an alert hunter. I think the pose looks fine otherwise. A suggestion some of my Discord members made was just including her axe in the empty space on the left there, which I think would help this one a lot. Spirit looks really awkward, I think. I do kind of like how she looks both sad but also angry or excited. The way she's posed just feels quite awkward, I think, and unless you study the expression more closely, it just looks a bit strange. Artist is fairly low for me, as I'm not really sure what they were going for with this one. The facial expression I find kind of confusing and unclear, and the way she holds her arm up looks somewhat awkward to me. I do quite like her positioning, however, but just some aspects I'm unsure of. Nurse I think is okay, and I think they were going for somewhat of a mournful and distant look. It kind of works, I think. I'm not sure. It feels lacking in some ways. The way she's posed feels like there's lots of dead space. Plague I don't mind. She looks quite awkward with the way she stood. Her face in particular just looks a bit odd. I think a closer look would be better. Maybe something like we got in the trailer, so we get to see a closer contrast between her corrupted and uncorrupted sides. Wraith's is a little different with the pose, and I think I like the inclusion of the weapon. I like the far off stare, but I do think it'd look better being more direct and having him more central. Dredge is pretty okay, I think. It relays Dredge well. You get the main features in there and the skulls in the back and stuff. It's fairly simplistic, but it looks pretty good. I don't have much to say for it. Clown is similar with him just standing there with his knife. It looks fine, I think, and relays him also okay. I have no issue with these, but they also don't stand out much really either, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Maya's I want to put in a similar spot with him being positioned in his tier 3 pose. This one was originally a little different and quite a lot worse, I think. They did a good job altering it. It still looks a little awkward, but I much prefer the pose. Singularity I think is on the better end of these regular poses. I like how he's posed, with the claw kind of hanging down in front of him. It makes it look fairly grotesque and more twisted. I think having a wider shot also works well for Hux here, as he has lots of cool features that are worth showing off. Doctor's is pretty goofy looking, and I'm very split on it. Part of me thinks too goofy, another part thinks, well, it's Doctor, so it kind of should be. One thing I definitely think could be altered is the positioning. I think hands clasped together are more important than seeing the left shoulder, so I would shuffle him over a little bit. Deathslinger is similar, as it's a little goofy, although I do prefer it over Doctor's. I think the pose is a bit more interesting, and incorporates a key part of Slinger, being the Redeemer. I don't really like the face he's making. It makes him look pretty silly, even though he's meant to be a grisly bounty hunter. I like the concept, but I think it could be improved with a few tweaks. Executioner is next, and this one I think is okay. It's an improvement over his original image, which just features the pyramid, but I'm unsure how well it captures him. The knife pose looks a little awkward. Overall, okay, I think. Bubba's is very simple, but I think relays the character well. The portrait makes it look like he's just spotted you and is swinging the chainsaw around. It works well, I think. Billy's encapsulates him well. The way he's got the chainsaw up, ready to sprint, his mouth wide open and about to scream probably. I also like that there's kind of sadness in his eyes. I think it's a good detail and exposes that inner humanity. Skull Merchants I actually quite like. The way her arm is posed with the claw coming up and almost protecting her is nice. It's also a good contrast between the more sophisticated hand and the harshness of the dual blade. I don't think much of her overall design, but I think they did the portrait well. Freddy seems to be fairly divisive. I personally like it. For a character that is otherwise fairly dull, this portrait makes him have a bit more personality, and look more characterful. I like how it incorporates the clawed glove too. Demogorgons is another pretty good one. It's a pose that works well for it and relays the animalistic nature of it, while showing off key features like the claws and mouth. I do think it'd be better front facing, but otherwise it's good. Trickster's is fairly simplistic, but it does fit him well. He's pulling a bit of a pose, he looks like he's kind of looking down on you with superiority. It works well for the character, I think. Legion's is good, I think. It looks a bit goofy and they're posing a bit, but like Trickster, they're kind of like that personality-wise, so it makes sense. This one is cool too, with the other Legion member portraits being visible behind Frank. Oni's looks very menacing, I think, and I appreciate the difference in pose here. It makes him look kind of pensive, but also very angry. He looks to be crouched down and kind of leaning on his blade, which I think works well. Cenobites I kind of like. I like the pose and the way he's casually waving his hand to summon and direct the chains, but I find his expression kind of funny. I don't know why. It's like this weird smirk, which I don't think fits him. That's just a personal gripe, and I think he would look better with a flatter expression. Pigs is fairly simple, but I like it a lot. I think the pose is good and kind of looks like a mid-ambush kind of thing. This is one where the side positioning works a little better, as you get to see more of her pig mask, which was otherwise hard to make out in the original. Nemesis I like for the simplicity. It relays his bulkiness and anger, the facial expression makes him look pretty menacing, and I like how he takes up more of the portrait area, making him look larger. Knight is good for similar reasons to Nemesis, although I think it's a little better. They're mostly focused on making him look menacing. It relays well that he's a trained and skilled knight, with his pose, revealing his helmet, armor, and sword. The pose also makes it feel like he's about to strike. Twins have a nice portrait, having the two of them looking at one another. I actually like a lot how they don't look toward us as the player. It's almost like they care more about each other over trying to look scary, which I like. Blight I like a lot, which might be a bit of a hot take. It's fairly similar to the pose he did in his reveal trailer. It makes him look crazy and obsessed as he kind of looks over his shoulder. The wide eyes and mouth are in full view, and this is a case where a slightly off-centered image works well for the portrait, I think. Hags is really great, honestly. I like the way she is pouncing toward the camera with full view of her claw and her hollow eyes. Very creepy, I think, and works well, particularly with her being one of the jump scare characters. Ghostface they really nailed, I think. It's pretty simple and seems to be the same pose that he did in his release trailer. It fits him well and gets across lots of personality. Wesker's has a good combination of looking fairly menacing, but also relaying his goofy self. The way he's posed is great, and the inclusion of the Ouroboros tendril feels natural. His facial expression is creepy and menacing, and he looks like he's up to something. Xenomorph I do think they really nailed, as it looks amazing and embodies Xeno very well. The pose looks very menacing, and the way the body and tail coil around one another just looks really awesome. It uses the space well and fits a lot in without being overwhelming. Alright, well that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts on these down below. Thanks, and goodbye.